Kei aku nui, kei aku rahi, e rame mine mai nei, he rungi te kārangatanga o te wā, e mihi ana. E mihi ana ki a koutou e tatu mai ki te whakanui i te ora o tō tātou rangatira rāwiri. Te tangata i mate ai i tērā mārama, nui te ohorere, he aitua tērā anō reira haramai. Maurea mai o koutou tino whakaaro a ki te whai a wahi i tēnei tangihanga ki aia. He tangata humari e tērā, he tangata koi te hene ngaro, o tērā te mea nui ko tōna kaha ki te tia ki tangata, me ngā tauira, toko maha i uru mai raru i ana parirau, no reire e rāwiri, haere atu rā, haere atu rā, haere atu rā. Te meharo hoki ki te kite te tini me te mano, he hui mai nei i runga i aia, he tohu tērā ki tōna mana, me te aroha ki aia. Nō reire, he aku rangatira, e kuia mā, e koro mā e rau rangatira mā haramai nei, ki te whaiwahi i tēnei hui ki te whakanui i tō tātou kahukura, whatukura a rawiri, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, me karakia. E whātoro ana te ngākau ki a rātua te wahingaro ki a tau mai nei te manaakitanga ki runga ki tēnei huihuinga. Tā wharau te mātou ki ngā kākahu take o te mana atua, o te mana āra ki tūturu ki a rongo whakamaua ki a tīna. Tīna, haumi e, hui e, tā eke e. He waita. Aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi tātou e, te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e, tātou e. Ara, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Graham Leonard, taku ingoa. I'm a principal scientist at GNS Science, and I'm affiliated with the Joint Centre for Disaster Research here at Massey University, and one of Carol's work colleagues too. And David has been a close friend and colleague and close family friend with David, Carol, Joshua and my family for the last 25 years. Thank you all for coming today, for some travelling across the motu, and from across the globe as well. I have a few housekeeping things to start with. Please turn off your phones. If there's an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Most of you will know this. And then our assembly point is out the front here. If there is an alarm or a fire drill, there are 4 exits. You can see them on the 4 different walls. And again, the assembly point is out the front. We're above the tsunami evacuation zone, so you don't need to go beyond that, even if it's long or strong. Toilets, I've been told there are several composting toilets out this way and around to the left, in true David fashion. And there are tribute books down the side on tables as you came in. Please do add your thoughts and your memories to those. There is a therapy dog here. Just to be aware, it's a very well trained, very friendly dog. The memorial is being live streamed and recorded. And there's also an official photographer who will be travelling around taking photographs. If you'd rather not be photographed, please make this known to them. We need to wrap up sharply around 3:20 p.m. Then there will be refreshments served, and we do need to leave the venue by 4 p.m. So there'll be time to mingle, light refreshments will be served. Look, it's my privilege to join you in today's memorial for David, joining with Carol, Joshua, and so many family, friends, and colleagues in the room and around Aotearoa and around the world. David was many things to many people: husband, father, son, brother, friend, and collaborator and mentor to many of us and to so many people. Today, we'll be thinking about David, sharing the loss, thinking about his life, the humour he had, the fun we had with him, and his dedication, his commitment, his passion, his respect for so many scientists and friends throughout the world. He was a leader in so many things. As many of you know, he set up the social science team at GNS Science 25 years ago and pioneered embedding social science alongside earth and hazard and risk science. David was the social science team, it was just David. And then he hired extra people, half of me, Julia, and it grew and grew. And it grew to become the envy of the globe. He realized that this needed to come alongside universities, to be embedded with psychology and social science, and he grew the Joint Centre for Disaster Research here at Massey University, coming half-time here and then ultimately becoming the Distinguished Professor at the Joint Centre. Through David's leadership, there was a significant broadening of geological hazards application in Aotearoa, New Zealand. His decades of mentoring and nurturing of graduate students and the staff will be deeply missed. David has an infectious passion for public good, social science, health, earth science, education, history, support of Māori aspirations, and was a leader in interdisciplinary work. He was a close friend to many colleagues at GNS and Massey, and a significant number of people throughout the many universities in New Zealand and in government here and around the world. He held an array of key leadership positions. He was a good man, David, and thorough. He was visionary, but also he just got it done. Many of you will have seen tsunami blue lines or had emergency mobile alerts occur on your phone, maybe with COVID. David was instrumental with many of us for decades in the mapping and social science behind those and the business cases for those alerts. They were designed for tsunami. And he had a real vision to think about the human behaviour behind it. If you go to Ruapehu volcano, you'll see the Lahar hazard zone maps are on the backs of toilet doors. They're David's maps, and he realised that's where people would see them. Lately, David has focused on the development of the profile of science in the Chatham Islands and the 150-year anniversary of the US and New Zealand science collaboration through that. And he's been working throughout the motu with Māori to embed Māori research into our Māori perspectives alongside physical science in large endeavour research programs and many other endeavours. Today we'll hear from people who knew David in the many facets of life, some of which I've just touched on. The first person I would like to invite is Hinemoa Katene. Hinemoa is founder and director of Hono, the new Māori emergency management initiative housed at Massey. Hinemoa.
Tēnā tātou. Kind of dreading this today, but first of all, I'd like to take you all on my second speed date to talk about my time with my dear friend David. Over the past weeks, a few of us, Carol, Josh, and the extended close family and friends were able to gather and have a few nights of karakia at the new Hono offices and training rooms at Massey. David had impacted many of us here today, and that's why this room is full. His presence and his life will definitely be missed, but I feel like his spirit definitely lives on in probably all of us somewhat. In me especially, I think if I look around this room, you probably all knew him a lot longer than I did. So I still question why I'm here, but I did spend a lot of personal time with David. Over those discussions, especially during the karakia we held for David, we heard a lot about his multiple work wives and work sisters and work family, which I consider myself to be the younger sister of David. We heard about Carol's work husbands, and being a Mormon, it was interesting to hear that other people have lots of wives. It's not us, actually. So It's a bit of a joke these days, but it's true. He brought people together like a family. If you had anything to do with emergency management, science or research, you likely have come across him somewhere, either in your readings or in your personal life, especially here in New Zealand, but also internationally. What I want to talk about today are some of the deeper characteristics that I got to learn in my time with David. We travelled extensively over the last year doing emergency management education, and I've heard many people talk about his creative accounting. I call it leveraging. And we also learnt about his interest in online art purchases and bits and pieces, and how he was leveraging his time and his own money to purchase these items, which I'm sure Carol and Josh are unravelling right now, what they are, where they are, and why, trying to figure out why he even bought them in the first place. But a lot of times he would have serious meetings, like proper meetings, and we heard from one of the PhD students how he was trying to hold off her serious talk about her PhD suspension, which I've learned is not meaning suspended from school, it means holding off, and how he was bidding on something or selling stocks or something. Well, I've experienced that in some of our meetings. He'd go, hold up, I've just got 5 more minutes till this bid shuts, and then I'll get back to you. So that was funny that other people experienced that too. And I also got to learn about all the passions he had. He did have a passion for history. He had a passion for people and communities. He had a passion for the Chatham Islands, which he leveraged a lot of double, triple, quadruple projects across it so that he could buy his 10 voucher tickets for a year and be able to get the discounts on the flights there so that he could do the science, help with the research and carry on the kaupapa. He was really good at it. He had a passion for the hikoi, and I know that because in the slideshow you'll see a photo of him and I shoulder to shoulder. And I'm going to quote what he said to me. He said, "I've taken the day off. I'm not sure what all my colleagues think, but I'm determined to be present and accounted for during this hikoi." He said, and I quote this, "I'm not the only Pākehā who believes in this. My ancestor came here on February the 7th, the day after the treaty was signed, on the basis that we are visitors, but that we can coexist. I have nowhere else to call home. This is it for me." A few colourful swear words. "And I'm going to make my submission, take my tupuna photo to the submissions." And he said, "And I'm going to let them know my ancestor counts as well." So I was really sort of chuffed that he had that sort of passion about it. He loved rocks. He told me he was originally a geologist. He loved Coke and coffee, that much I knew, because he always came in my door picking up his Coke or buying a coffee at Tussock or somewhere else that we were, wherever we were. He loved emergency management. He loved his team at JCDR. He loved all his students, and I haven't met many of you, but I know I've heard lots of your names, because every now and again he would say, "That's so-and-so. They used to be one of my students and now they're working in this agency or that agency," and he wouldn't puff himself up about it. He'd go, "Yeah, I know them because they were a student of his at one stage." He loved science and research. He loved reading. He's a bit of a hoarder, and I'm not looking forward to going through his hoarding at JCDR, but we're going to get through it. But I'd like to do a little bit more right now and just break down those characteristics and the traits that David had and go deeper a bit on a personal level. Like I mentioned, I haven't known David for very long, a couple of years, but officially I became a Massey employee in June last year. He'd been asking me to partner with him and JCDR for a while, and I kept saying, no, I've got to do more where I am. And then finally, when I'd had enough, I decided, okay, I'm going to trust this random guy and see where it takes me. So I did, and on the journey, boy, did I get a deep understanding of his character traits. And I'd like to say I'm grateful that he trusted me as well. I consider him the mātāmua, or actually the rangatira of this space. He had humility, and even though he was considered, I believe, number one in his field, he was very humble about it all. He didn't like being called a distinguished professor. He just wanted to be called David. When the College of Humanities and the JCDR team threw him a pretty tight little smallish party, a surprise party, because they knew he wouldn't approve of it, to recognise him for that distinguished professor title, I suppose you call it, he was taken back because he didn't expect or he didn't want anything or he didn't like to get acknowledgement for himself. But he was happy. He did say to me quietly afterward, this day is one of the happiest days for him. It became a friendly joke amongst a few of us, and every time we wanted to irritate him, we'd call him distinguished professor. And he'd roll his eyes and try to brush it off. He wasn't comfortable us using that name, but we did laugh about it, and he would laugh back with us. He wasn't in a rush to put it on his website or any of his research titles. He just wanted to get the work done. He wanted to make an impact, and him and I discussed, we don't care if we don't die broke. My husband would probably not agree with that, but he'd say, as long as we make an impact. And I'd say to him, I go to funerals every other week at our marae, and people don't talk about how much money you have. They talk about the money you had. And David had lots of mana in this space. When I reflect on David, I have the thought, which is my understanding, this is not a sermon, but he reminds me of the proverb in Proverbs in the Bible 18:12. Before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honour is humility. That's totally David. The only time he ever boasted was when he asked me if I had a Kori Lounge membership, and I said, I do have a few months left on my existing one, but I don't know if I'll be able to afford to renew it. He said, I have Gold Elite. And he said, I can get 5 people in for a free meal, so if you travel with me, you're good to go. Well, in the last few days, we've been joking and doing a karanga because we're sad that those free meals are gone and that when we travel, no one's going to have Gold Elite status. So we're all going to have to go in the pleb lounge, and we kept saying that to him. Anyway, I want to talk to you about how forgiving he is too. There's a traditional proverb that says the noblest vengeance is to forgive. Forgiveness is the needle that knows how to mend. To forgive is to set the prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. David definitely had that trait, because I heard many stories of people who did some pretty unspeakable things to him, but he would always, if he found a way and they had changed and come back into his life again, he would forgive pretty easily. He was charitable. David had a very charitable and kind heart. He was generous to a fault, some might say. Charity is the bone shared with the dog when you are just as hungry as the dog. Charity begins at home, but should not end there. No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Integrity. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than a rich man who is crooked in his ways. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. I knew David to have honesty, charity, and integrity. He never did things for himself. It was always for the better good of others. My dad always told me, if you leave a job with integrity, you own the world. even without a cent in your pocket. I watched David closely, and he did have integrity. He stayed true to his word, and his word was good, and it was good enough for me. So if he trusted somebody that I didn't know, I trusted them as well. Humour. David has a great sense of humour, as some of you who are close to him might have known. Over the past weeks, a few of us close to him have been reminiscing about some of his humour and how he could take people making jokes about him as well. Well, yesterday was a highlight for me with David's humour and our little circle of friends. I had already received a few phone calls from the director of Tipene Funerals requesting that we go and pick up his ashes when we were ready. It just wasn't time prior to yesterday. And when our little group of Kelvin, Tash, Josh and I decided it was time, we went off with the knowledge that the last of the bills was due to be paid. So we all turned up at Tipene Funerals yesterday, knocked on the door, and a lovely lady opened it up. She was expecting us. And the four of us were laughing and giggling. And I'm not going to say who said, "Excuse me, we're here for a click and collect." David Johnston, and we all burst into laughter. We paid the bill, we started laughing, and we walked out into the car park that was empty. We walked David up to the car and realised that I had parked crooked like David does, even though the car park was empty. And so I started cursing at David, saying, "David, I haven't parked the car straight since the day you left. Tomorrow better be the last day." Well, FYI, I parked out there crooked. Just not on purpose, but when I saw it, I went, you know what, I'm going to fix it. So I did. I fixed it before I walked in here. So we took a photo of us with him, and we took off. My last remarks in closing are, if I imagine a big room like this, and this is my belief, David and I never spoke about my faith or anything. We spoke about everything else but. But in my faith, I believe that our spirits carry on and that everything has wairua. And part of that belief is that families are forever. And in David's life, I believe that he is going to be forever in our hearts and families. I picture a big room where one day I'll navigate through the crowds of familiar and unfamiliar faces, and I'll be so happy to see David, because we spent a lot of hours together driving, with his terrible driving, might I add, and talking about his family life and my family life and the things that were important to him. I'd like to sing you one last little waiata that was sung on Parliament Steps not far from here for Norman Kirk when he passed. And our Auntie Davi Kātini Horvath wrote this for him. And the last verse is very appropriate. I sung it next to David when we got to go and see him. We went to view him. And it's appropriate for David. It talks about the great tōtara tree that has fallen. And a couple of words after that, ruana te whenua, referring to the earth shaking, which is quite appropriate for David. So I'm just going to get through that last verse and then I'll finish. But I'd like to thank you for asking me, Carol and Josh, to speak today. I wasn't real happy about it at first, but I was never going to say no, you know that. Okay, here we go. Kua hinga e te tōtara nui e ruana te whenua, kua hinga e te kura. Haere ki te tini ki te mano e. Haere ki te iwi nui I te pō. Kia ora. Thank you.
We'll move on to our next speaker now, Vicky Johnston. Vicky is a former doctoral student at Joint Centre for Disaster Research, a Fulbright recipient, founder and director of Pro Fellow, based in Bend, Oregon, and has travelled from the United States to be here today. Kia ora.
So I was one of the students that had the great privilege and fortune to be advised by David when I was a PhD student here, beginning in 2011. And really, David is the sole reason that I achieved a lifelong dream of a PhD. And I know this is true for many other students that came to Massey and the JCDR. So I hope that I might speak on behalf of this great diaspora of graduates, both in New Zealand and abroad, who are now working all over the world, who are as indebted to David as I am. So I came to New Zealand in 2011 and was meant to just be here on a 7-month policy fellowship. I came with my partner, Ryan, just coming for a short adventure, and I was an emergency management practitioner. As part of this fellowship, I had to get an academic advisor. So the person who kept coming up was David Johnston. David Johnston is the person. I was really new to research, new to the field, so I had no idea that he wasn't just any scholar. He was the preeminent scholar globally in the field that I was interested in, which was disaster education for children. So he was one of the few people globally who had done really in-depth research in this area. So when I first started working with David, I quickly realized that, he's not just a scholar, he's a leader in a multitude of organizations, JCDR, GNS Science. He was a great advocate and organizer for big projects. He was a prolific grant maker, or the rainmaker as we called him. You know, he's always money anywhere for anything. But he was also a respected boss. He was an advisor, a friend, and a great family man. And so even though it would have been a very short time that we started to get to know him, as soon as Ryan and I really realized what an extraordinary person this is, we really felt that, okay, we need to work hard. We need to prove ourselves to him and make sure that he doesn't regret the time and investment that he put into us. So just 2 months into my fellowship, he suggested that I enter the PhD program at Massey, and I said, oh, no. Because in the United States, any degree that you get is extremely expensive. So I said, we can't afford to do that at this point. And he said, oh, no, Vicky, if you get in, we'll figure out funding, because he was always the funding master. And somehow in this very short period of time, he not only got me into the PhD program, he found me the funding for the tuition and a stipend, and was even just helping us just financially, personally, and he started to become a really great friend. And once I got into the PhD program, then the real adventure began. We were doing field work all over the world, New Zealand, US. We were going to conferences in Australia and Canada. He even led a delegation to my home country's capital, Washington, D.C., that I got to be a part of. And if anyone has ever studied in the United States or has been in the academic world in the US, this is unheard of, this PhD experience that I had. So it was just such an extraordinary experience. And because of him, I transformed from being a B-average student to this pretty good scholar. I just had such a good time and got to learn from him as a researcher, as a professional, and as a leader. But fast forward 10 years, until I reflected on how influential he was, did I really understand the impact that he had on me. Because the big thing about David is that he believed in limitless opportunity. There was never a limit on what could be done. Any project, any idea was possible. He never told you to recalibrate your goals or, turn something down. Because he not only supported our academic goals, I mean, he was even supporting our crazy business ideas that Ryan and I had. We were doing pitch competitions in Wellington. So, I mean, he just loved everything that we were involved in. And it occurred to me that that was the secret to great mentorship, was this just unwavering support and belief in someone's potential. So today I'm actually writing a book because in the position that I have now, I now mentor lots and lots of people in helping them achieve their academic and professional goals. And I realized that David had a major stamp on this. He truly influenced the way that I mentor others, so much so that I've been able to unlock in other people an extraordinary promise and potential. I've helped people achieve things that they never thought possible, but this is only because David believed this in me. And so just 2 days before we heard of David's passing, I had just spoken to David in December. He was sending me pictures from DC from his latest trip with Josh. And I was writing the passage in the manuscript for this book about how he really was the greatest academic mentor of my life. And I'm sorry, David, I didn't get to tell you. But David, you are the reason I'm standing here now and doing all the incredible things that I'm doing now and all the things that are coming next. And I am a vessel of your legacy. As a vessel, I've now impacted many other people, and I am just one of a multitude of vessels, many, many vessels that he created. So that means he hasn't just impacted hundreds of people or even thousands of people. His legacy has impacted millions of people through us, the vessels. So David, thank you for what you gave Ryan and I. And we will never forget this, and I promise we will continue to work hard to make you proud. So we love you, David.
Thank you, Vicky. Our next speaker is Leanne Dalziel. Leanne is ex-member of Parliament, Mayor of Christchurch, who has worked extensively with David on recovery from the Canterbury earthquakes and earthquakes in general.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Can I begin by offering my love and condolences to Carol and Josh? And in so doing, I bring the love and thoughts of many who would love to have been here with us today. To describe this as a devastating beginning to 2025 would be an understatement. Knowing that David was doing something he loved is a small comfort, but it has come as a total shock to us all. There have been many conversations about David over the past short while, given the extensive networks that David either created or was connected to. Members of the Institute of Law, Emergencies and Disasters and the Law Faculty at Canterbury University, where I'm now studying, have all been saying he will be sorely missed. And Laurie Johnston sends her love from California, and I'm going to read to you what she has said. I want Carol and Josh to know that David's impact was global and will endure. His work after the Canterbury earthquakes greatly improved policies and outcomes for many, many people. For me personally, it's hard to imagine a future trip to New Zealand without David here. He always made time to visit, even if it was just a quick coffee or lunch, whenever we could meet up. He helped find funding to support my recovery research following the Canterbury earthquakes and was so generous with connections and introductions. I will miss his collaboration and friendship immensely. And that sums up what you've already heard so many people saying about the impact that he had, improving outcomes for people, making time, his generosity, his connections, his introductions, his collaboration, his friendship. My experience is no different. David was one of my earthquake buddies. I made quite a few friends in the aftermath of the 2010-2011 Canterbury earthquakes, And I remember what each of them taught me about the challenges we would face and how they helped guide our city in so many different ways. The best ones were my earthquake buddies, and David was definitely one of those. A friend not just to me, but to the city. I first learned of David when I read his name on the program for a recovery seminar that he introduced in the aftermath of the September 2010 earthquake. The fact that the seminar was in September shows he understood how important it was to prepare people for what they were in for. He knew that we wouldn't know what we didn't know, and he was determined from those early days that we would be as prepared as we could be, even before the February earthquake struck. I can't remember exactly when we met or the circumstances, but it feels like I'd known him from the start. He had so much to offer. And I was like a sponge, just soaking up information from whoever would give me the time of day, and some of you are in this room today. My earthquake buddies were the ones who did, and David was generous with his time, his experience, and his knowledge. He introduced me to his colleagues and, of course, to Carol and Joshua, who he brought to Christchurch for a year. Joshua reminded me that I'd come to the Christmas barbecue when they'd moved into the house. David was very proud of his barbecuing skills that night. I've been reading what people have written about him from his colleagues and postgrad students he supervised, who all described him as a mentor and friend, through to the US Embassy, who acknowledged him for his integral work in the 150th anniversary of the US-New Zealand scientific collaboration. His international work is leading to tributes being published in different parts of the world. His work was prodigious, and for some reason he and I clicked. And I was grateful that he treated me like his students and colleagues. I felt too that I had found a mentor and a friend. Nothing was too much trouble as he guided me through the challenges of a post-disaster recovery that he understood better than many of those who had found themselves in positions of authority. He was true to his values, and when he saw that things were not right, he was not afraid to say so. David sent me a message on my 60th birthday, and thanking him, I replied that he was one of my special earthquake buddies. That earned me a lovely picture, which he took of Carol and Josh. The three of you were out enjoying a meal, and I suspect in Dunedin. He was so proud of both of you, as evidenced by the follow-up photo of Josh's graduation in 2022, one with Josh and Carol. Proud parents was the message. Every year I go back to where I lived on the 4th of September, the date of the first earthquake. It is now part of the Otakaro River Corridor, formerly the Red Zone, and I often went with my husband, Robbie. I'll never forget how David came with me to Bexley after we had met to watch the sunrise at New Brighton to keep me company on the first anniversary just a few short weeks after Robbie died. I felt I wasn't alone, and that was him, so thoughtful and kind, courageous and inspiring, loving and loved in return. We will never forget him in Otautahi Christchurch, and we pay tribute for all he has done. And finally, we ask all his students, colleagues, and those whose lives he touched to carry on the work that he was passionate about. Be fearless, be determined, and never give up. It is what he would want, and it matters. And you, my friend, you have earned your right to rest in peace too soon, but knowing that you made a difference in the lives of so many people. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.
Leanne, thank you for those wonderful insights. We'll move on to Jane Rovins. Jane is an ex-Joint Centre for Disaster Research Associate, now at National Emergency Management Agency, and has worked extensively with David in the international sphere.
Now I'm wishing I'd printed this with bigger print. All right. I want to start with a Samoan proverb, and Mike, forgive me if I mess up my pronunciation. You can correct me later. Ole ala ile, pulu ole Ta'atua. The path to leadership is through service. This has always stuck with me, and I didn't actually learn it till I came here, but it fits David really well. Today you've heard and will hear some of the many things, big and small, that David has contributed in support of people, research, disaster risk reduction and recovery in New Zealand. I'm here to talk about the impact and what he did for the rest of the world. I met David in Paris, France, at an inaugural meeting of the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk Science Committee. It set the stage for my friendship with David over the next 15 years. First, it was a meeting to tackle big problems with passion and collaboration, AKA bridge the gaps between natural and social science. No, it hasn't always been that way. Two, a hazard had to go awry, an Icelandic volcano eruption that no one can pronounce happened at the same time. And lastly, travel that just might not have gone as we planned, as we all got stuck in Europe for an extra 10 days. Not that it was all bad. I did ask David, as we over the next decade worked alongside each other all over the world, how is it that his family, Josh and Carol, allow him to travel as much as he did?
We're still asking.
I have your answer for you. You got all his air points. And because of that, you got to travel with him because you, Josh, no offense, Carol, were by far his favorite travel buddy anywhere in the world. So over the next decade, as he chaired the Science Committee for IRDR, or at conferences, insert any dozen of cities that we went to, or a World Meteorological Organization meeting, where we worked together to separate social science programs and get the weather wonks, AKA the natural scientists, to think about the people, or whether it was arriving in Myanmar without luggage or visas, or working on Tonga on tsunami preparedness pre-volcano eruption that ultimately, we would find out later, saved the lives of the people at Hayatafa Resort, where we used to stay every time we went, or Cyclone Gita recovery work, or whether it was attending the global platforms in Geneva. He would talk to everyone about anything, but he had an art, and a true art, maybe a little science, of bringing it back to disaster risk reduction and the importance of people. He never saw title, he just saw people. And because of that, I would like to share with you several readings from people around the world that have sent their love and condolences for Carol, the family, and all of us here in New Zealand that will miss David greatly. From Salvano Borsigno, the former head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. These are indeed very sad news and a very untimely loss. David was a most valuable colleague. He contributed greatly to our common field of interest. It was always a pleasure to work with him. David deserved great recognition for his hard work on risk reduction and education at the university and community levels, but also his support to the international networking in the field of disaster risk reduction. It was a pleasure always to work with him and learn from him. From Lung Lung, the administrative officer at the Beijing office of the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk Program. It is with a heavy heart and still in shock and sorrow upon learning of the passing of our dear friend and colleague David. It is difficult to put into words the profound sense of loss as I struggle to come to terms with the reality that we have lost him forever. Professionally, David was an epitome of expertise and dedication, his work earning him the respect and admiration of everyone who had a privilege of working alongside him. He was instrumental in guiding the IRDR IPO through challenging times, demonstrating his exceptional problem-solving skills and unwavering commitment to excellence. On a personal note, David was a mentor, a confidant, an elder whose wisdom and kindness left an indelible mark on my life. I recall the guidance he provided during some of our darkest hours. His words were always filled with encouragement and insight, helping me navigate through turbulent times with grace and resilience. The lessons he imparted were not just about professional growth, but also about life and character rebuilding. David's memory will forever be etched in our hearts. He may no longer be with us physically, but his spirit lives on in the work he accomplished and the people he touched. May we cherish those memories and draw strength from them as we move forward. Ian Lisk, who's the president of the World Meteorological Organization's Services Commission and the UK Met Service, I've just heard the very sad news of David's passing, a top guy who gave so much to our environmental hazards and disaster management communities, greatly missed already. From Shirley and Steve Johnston, who are good friends to Dave and Josh, and anyone else who went to the Mammoth Institute, disaster researchers and fellow Kiwi Americans. In the end, the measure of a person is not in their accomplishments, although significant. However, it is how they live on in the hearts of others and continue to bring about better angels. By this measure, David's life was rich, and his influence will carry on to new generations. Our memories are many, but our fondest are of the Mammoth Institute, which we will carry forward. Mark Pelling from University College of London says, David's untimely passing is indeed very sad news. His down-to-earth manner and collaborative instinct embodied a lot of our collective mission. Susan Cutter from the University of South Carolina in the United States, I too am saddened by David's passing and will remember him with fondness and good cheer, hosting many of us who had the joy of visiting him in New Zealand. This is a loss for our community personally and professionally, and for the students he has trained and worked with, and especially his wonderful family. But be well, everyone. Time and joy are precious commodities. As you have heard, DJ had a way of knowing when people needed something, even if they didn't, and this was often the case with me. It's David's fault I'm here in New Zealand today. When I left IRDR, David asked me what was next, and I said, I'm not really sure as long as it involves scuba diving. And he said, New Zealand's a great place. We even have diving, and you have friends, come hang out. And I did, and the rest, as they say, is history. He always seemed to know how to support the people he cared about, and I am forever grateful for him for allowing me to be the free range and trusting and supporting me from day one by calling me his adopted Kiwi until I officially became one earlier this year. Please remember his reach is far bigger and wider than New Zealand, and the global community deeply miss him and will continue to. Thank you.
Kia ora, Jane, and thank you for the glimpse into David's global reach and the messages from people around the world. Our next speaker is Simon Nathan. Simon is retired from GNS Science, has had a long association with David and many shared passions, not least of which is history. Simon.
Tēnā katoa. My name is Simon Nathan. I have known David and Carol in different ways for many years and rejoiced when they got together. My first memory of David was about 30 years ago when we moved up to Palmerston North. I rather tentatively went into the tea room in the soil science department, recognising no faces there, and was so pleased when David came up and talked to me. He told me about his PhD work on the 1945 Ruapehu eruption, then just getting underway, and I was intrigued. Like so many others of you, I will always remember David for his friendliness, as well as for his enthusiasm for everything he was involved in. Over the years, I watched David's research career and range of interests develop with amazement. He had fingers in so many pies, but I would just like to share my memories of one thing we worked on together. I was on the West Coast at the time of the 1968 Inangahoe earthquake and involved in subsequent investigations. A few years ago, I got an invitation from David to call and have a coffee with him at Tussock. When we sat down, his opening words were, "What are we going to do about commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Inangahoe earthquake?" I was a bit dumbfounded. I wasn't sure that anyone actually wanted to remember it. But David quickly outlined his philosophy of commemorating major disasters so that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. He sat me down with a pad and cross-questioned me about everything I could remember, including the names of key people around Inangahoe. He was confident that he could get the local civil defence people to organise a function. I came away from our meeting with a checklist of actions I had to follow up. To get in touch with old friends from Inangahoe, prepare an article of my recollections, dig out my old 35mm slides and get them digitised, prepare a script and illustrations for a presentation on the day of the commemoration, and then a follow-up video. I don't know what went on behind the scenes. Possibly some of you from the JCDR were involved, but on the day the commemoration was wonderfully organised. The old Inangahoe Hall was cleared out and there was a large evident audience of former residents and emergency response staff from all over the West Coast, with the Mayor and Bulla District councillors in attendance, as well as the whole of the Anangahua School. I gave a slideshow, which was greeted with interest as people could recall the extent of the damage. But the highlight was an interactive session at the end, when David said to the audience that now we want to hear your memories and what you're going to tell your children about earthquakes. There was no shortage of contributors, but I've always remembered the comments of the local nurse. She said that she spent much of the day of the earthquake attending to cut feet. The earthquake shaking emptied all the shelves and cupboards so that the kitchens were covered in broken glass, and people rushing around in the dark cut their feet. So the advice she wanted to pass on to her family was, as soon as the shaking stops in an earthquake, to put something on your feet before you get into rescue mode. David was very taken with this, and I think it's a message he would like me to pass on to you all individually today. Farewell, David. We miss you, and you have made a difference to all of us in so many different ways.
Thank you, Simon. Articulate and funny and punctual, as always. You may have noticed your program looks slightly like a conference proceedings. Our next two speakers are 6A and 6B. Jackie Gurdon and Jocelyn Powell are here to provide a window into David's Rekohu Chatham Islands work and life. Please come on up.
Kia ora everybody. I'm actually the tourism manager for the Chatham Islands and have worked very closely with David for quite a long time. This afternoon I have got a message from the Mayor of the Chatham Islands, Monique Croon, who is unfortunately unable to be here today, and then I've got a few reflections, very brief ones for myself, and I've taken out all the ones about David as his vision and his global thinking and his resourcefulness, which of course is leverage as we all know it, because that all happened on the Chatham Islands, as I'm sure many of you already knew. So firstly from Monique, tēnā koutou katoa. As Mayor of Chatham Islands, Monique Croon, on behalf of our community, it is with a heavy heart that we share with you all today the huge loss David leaves behind for our island. David brought science, people, projects, events, and invested in the island by becoming a ratepayer. Carol's laughing, I know why. Yeah, and Joss will talk about that shortly. He connected with so many. He had so many plans for the future, and we can only hope that in some way together we can keep his legacy going. It is still hard to believe that David is not here. In my mind, he is still coming in March to talk about gateway opportunities for those who want to study through Massey University. Then in August, our Festival of Science, and then Christmas, when David, friends and family spend time at the races, enjoying our beautiful festive summer weather. On December 31st, the Chatham Islands Jockey Club celebrated 150 years of racing. David supported the planning of this event from start to finish. We will miss his visits to Admiral Garden, the museum and the council. Thinking of you both, Carol and Joss, sending love and support from Wharakari Rakohu. I know the road ahead will be difficult, but make sure you have cricket days and many adventures. This would be David's wish for you both. To David's friends, colleagues and Kelvin, hope Kelvin's listening, there will always be a welcome mat for you in the Chatham Islands. Kua hinga te tautra e te waianui a tānei. So that's from Monique. Just some reflections from me. David was a huge champion for the Chatham Islands, and many people have acknowledged him and his work, his catch-ups, going along to watch the netball and jumping in the truck to have a chat afterwards. Connection was important to him. I'm just going to talk very briefly about two of David's what I'd call signature projects, the Festival of Science and the Transit of Venus. The Festival of Science came from my first meeting with David after hearing about all the science work happening on the island and its important role nationally and internationally. Under David's leadership, it quickly grew to around 60 scientists, Chatham Islanders and visitors coming together to understand and share the findings of the island research projects. This extended to schools, Kopinga Marae and the wider community. That event really grew and is really important for the Chatham Islands to actually get that research reported back to the people of the island, those findings shared. So very grateful to David for that. David soon realised, and I've heard a little bit today about David with anniversaries, he realised that the 150th year anniversary of the transit of Venus observations by the US Science Party on the Chatham Islands was approaching, understood to be the first US-New Zealand science collaboration. A replica observatory information kiosk popped up on Port Hutt, thanks to many people's hard work and the government's Tourism Infrastructure Fund. The American Embassy came on board, the American Ambassador visited, celebrations were held on the Chathams, Wellington and in the US, all masterminded by David. One of his next projects was recognising the Chatham Islands as a dark skies reserve, and this was, and then I've put in question marks, is to be the theme of the next Festival of Science. As Monique has said, we would love David's work and the support to the island to be continued as his legacy. He will be sadly missed. Farewell to a good friend, colleague for so many from your beloved second home, Rakuhu Wharakari, Chatham Islands. Now this is the second part of the tag team, Johnston Powell.
Thanks, Jackie. You've said a lot of it. People have been saying an awful lot. So all I've got really to say is give you a little bit of story about how I met David, and it was really quite by chance that we became partners in establishing Wharaweka, or the Science House at Te Auni. So how did this happen? David came to have a chat with me in a cuppa back in 2020. We had a new museum, which he was really interested in helping with, and I was heavily involved with that. And the various projects, he wanted to talk about the various projects that he wanted to carry out. And it turned out that although he had a much wider vision than myself, we did share quite a bit of the same vision for the Chathams. David in particular wanted to develop citizen science and make it possible for university researchers, especially students, to come to the Chathams at reasonable cost to carry out their research. And I was seeking ways to encourage Chatham Islanders to undertake tertiary education, particularly environmental sciences, but the social sciences were also okay, and museum studies. We found these could work together. So to make all this possible, we needed to purchase a house. And I knew that the Holy Rollers, which was actually the Christian Scientist Fellowship's house, was for sale. So we got in touch with them, and their trust approved our plans and sold the place to us. So with David's enthusiasm, energy, and networks, and great networks, we've managed to improve the place a little and to provide accommodation to many scientists, both social and natural. The Chathams community also approved of what David and his colleagues were achieving and appreciated the Festival of Science, which Jackie's mentioned, and the reporting back of research to them, particularly the reporting back of the students' research to the community, because it was really bringing them together. David was always good to work with, and he'll be greatly missed on the islands. My hope is that both the Festival of Science and Wharaweka can continue. To finish, I'll read a note from Liz Day, who was assisting us at the house. Kia ora e te whānau pani. It is great sadness to learn of David's passing. In my short time of knowing David, working as his cleaner at the Wharaweka house at Te Auni, I have held him in high esteem with great respect and admired the science and educational work he is doing on the Chatham Islands. Whenever we did happen to meet, on a rare occasion of many of his brief visits, he was always very caring and asking if there was anything I needed for work or for myself. My deepest sympathy to Carol, Joshua and whānau. You will be greatly missed. Rest in peace. Ngā mi nui te aroha from Liz Day. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Kia ora, Jackie and Jocelyn. Thank you for providing further insights into David's love for Rekohu Wharikauri, Chatham Islands, and his life there. We're now going to take a break for a photo tribute to David's life. I'd now like to invite Carol up to share some thoughts with us.
don't know why I thought it was a good idea to go after that photo tribute. It just about undid me. So thank you all for being here. It means a lot to Josh and I, and David's brother Chris, and Sister Sarah, and the whole wider family. Thank you for being here. So it's now been 27 days since our lives changed forever. In just a moment, when I spoke to a paramedic on Pokakariki Hill, who told me that despite all their best efforts, they'd been unable to revive David when he suddenly collapsed without hiking with a friend. So over the last 27 days, we've struggled to process this news, like everyone else in this room, I know. Things that have helped us immensely have been the wonderful evening karakia that our dear friends Hinamawa, my work sister-in-law, and her husband Callum helped organise. And they just were lovely evenings where people were able to come together and to share memories and share food and get together. And anyone who was at them will never forget them. And we felt incredibly grateful to have had a sort of Te Ao Māori dimension to the whole process. And to be honest, I think Te Ao Pākehā has got a lot to learn from Te Ao Māori in terms of the whole bereavement thing. So we just feel very lucky to have had that dimension. What's also helped has been this huge volume of messages of support that have rolled in at all scales. So from friends and neighbours, like in the neighbourhood we've lived for 23 years, and from the JCDR team, from across Massey, across Wellington, across Aotearoa, and across the whole world, actually. And this reflects David's huge energy in working at all those different scales. So universal reaction across all these messages has been that people are shocked and saddened, and that's fair enough because it was so very brutally sudden. It was just like a bolt from the blue, it really was. And it's so very shocking, it's so very sad because David should have had another 20 years at least just to continue all his plans and schemes, and we miss him terribly, and I know most of you do as well. But for other people, after a while, another reaction kind of kicked in after the first reaction, and that was, damn it, David, this is so inconvenient. And this is because he had so very many projects and trips and plans and schemes and all these things sort of on the go, and we all have a ton of work to do, and sort of picking up all these projects and schemes, and there's all these plates spinning in the air, and they've all kind of, I'm not sure if being annoyed is a stage of grieving, but I've been stuck there. I seem to be stuck there for quite a while now. So I just want to use the rest of my time. How much time do I have, Graham? Okay, you may regret that. To talk about some of David's sort of core beliefs and mantras, and the first one is, it may not have escaped your notice that the speaking program features quite a powerful lineup of powerful women speakers. And so Josh and I did discuss this, and we said, do we need a bit of gender diversity in our lineup? And then we thought, nah, let's just go with it. So David was actually pretty comfortable, being surrounded by powerful and competent women. And the JCDR team has always been largely, dominated by women. And other university departments have a culture of beer drinking and things, and we had a culture of morning teas and home baking, and so there was always quite a sort of David encouraged this kind of feminine culture at JCDR. So thank you, Graham and Simon, for flying the flag for men.
You're our DEI people.
Yeah. Another of David's, so one of David's favourite movies in recent times was The Martian, and he loved telling us to work the problem, and he's left us a lot of problems to work. But buying the house on the Chathams, gave free rein to his ability, to the problem-solving challenges. And not that we're saying that the Chathams is like Mars in terms of, remoteness and accessibility or anything, but you get, he spent more time in Bunnings in the last 5 years than in the rest of his life, basically. And there was a lot of working of problems that went on. Although I can't help thinking that if he was going to be represented by a movie, it would be Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that was him. Another one of his saying, another thing that was important to him was tō tū te tiriti, and this became really important to him in recent years. And He spent, we all made submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill, and he was very hopeful he was going to speak to his one in person. And he spent much of the time on that final walk with our friend Jenny, sort of describing in an animated fashion what his submission was going to be like, with pictures of ancestors and, you know, all sorts of animated things going on. And he was not a person to pull rank and use that distinguished professor title at all, but I think he might have just done that, you know, for that occasion. You know, he might have just done that. And the thing I keep coming back to was something that emerged from the karakia, and that was his saying of, do good things with good people for good reasons. And everyone here is one of his good people. And so let's keep just doing the good things for good reasons. Kia ora.
Just like a good academic, Carol's only words were, "Was I on time?" Thank you, Carol, for such wonderful words. I'd like to move now to Tanya Gerard. Tanya is our General Manager of Māori Partnerships and Government Relations at GNS, recently also of National Emergency Management Agency, and I won't be gesturing to keep her to time because that could be career limiting.
Thank you, Graham. Kua ngaro koe I te pō, ko te pauri nui tā koto pipi whararoa e tangi nei, rere pauri I konei, kaikini te manawa, kaikini te aroha, kaikini te wairua. Haiahara, tū tonu te mahara. E te whānau pani, Josh, Carol, me tō whānau whānui. He mihi aroha ki a koutou katoa, ki ngā hoa mahi, ngā hoa, ngā rangatira I hara mai ki konei ki te whakamiharo tēnei tangata kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. I'm very honoured to be asked by Carol to speak about my work with David, and I'll be honest, mine and David's first meeting was not rainbows and unicorn farts. It was pretty much an argument. It was an argument. The first time was probably 2019. I just started with GNS Science. I'm not going to go into the content of the argument, but walked in, straight in, bang. I had fun. I think he did too. But the one thing I did appreciate about him was that instead of, as GNS, we had to protect one of our things, I can't say what it is, but what he did is that he protected his staff member and he protected the honour of JCDR. And that's what he was in that meeting to do. And that's what he did, and he did really well. And when I walked out of that meeting, I had mad respect for that man, for someone who could have easily thrown someone under the bus and said, yes, we'll just deal with it. He didn't. He stayed true, and he stayed by the side of his staff member. And for me, that was mad respect, to have someone who could do that. And I'm really happy we didn't base our relationship off that first meeting. Though every time he wanted to talk to me about the Chathams, he kept saying to me, no crayfish, no conversation, David. So he didn't really talk to me about the Chathams. One of the key things I did get to work with David on is iwi and Māori engagement, and this was something that was very dear to his heart. And he wasn't the type of person to come in, research, meet the people and then walk away, sort of like we describe as spray and walk away. David was embedded, and when he went into an area, went into a region, and being the knowledgeable person that he was embedded into that community. And he made sure that they knew of his presence and what he could actually bring. I was very fortunate to be able to work with him and Calvin for Ngāti Porou, and he said he was looking forward to working with Ngāti Porou. And being of Ngāti Porou descent, I was like, really? But he was. And Carol would have given it a couple of years and you would have had a house up the East Coast. I don't think we're joking with you, would have. Yeah. So for me, for him to be able to enter our region and know that it's a low socioeconomic, high Māori population, and very much at the behest of the environment, very much in the throes of preparing for tsunami. And what David wanted to do was ensure that we met with Ngāti Porou, but then we started educating the young ones, and that's what his program was focused on, alongside with Hinemore and Calvin, because we knew that the young ones were the ones that would actually carry it on. And up the East Coast, our kids are solid. And for them to be able to be taught and given that whole tools and that to be able to guide their own people, their elders, the adults in their lives, because David knew that if we teach the young ones, that would carry up through, and then they in turn would be teaching others as they come through. But the kids are really solid up there. And so for me, having that opportunity to actually work with David, and that he just showed such intense love of growing the next generation of emergency managers, and especially in those communities. I think he was absolutely stoked that majority of one of the training from the kids was done in Te Reo Māori, and he had to catch up fast, but he absolutely adored it. Also, the one thing I do love about David, and I'm really gutted about his sudden passing, is that to work with him on legacy and work with him on the next generation, being able to identify new Māori researchers and pull them through the process, which we were looking forward to do. I think for me, what sums up for me about David was a Facebook page that JCDR post had put on, that was from Nui Patch Aotearoa, which sums up to me about David. They said he was a friend to all, so down to earth, despite being a distinguished professor and a super expert in emergency management and disaster resilience. And he was always willing to share his knowledge and give us his time and expertise. And that for me summed it up for me, especially for the distinguished professor. I remember congratulating him, and he said he didn't like the title, but if it got more funding for JCDR, he'd wear it. I started my kōrero off with a whakatauki, which does talk about how one feels when one passes. And in English, it's really good in Māori, but in English, it described for me the feeling that I was hearing over the last few weeks, and that is, you have disappeared into the night, and a great darkness comes over us, and the pipi whārorua cries, and the darkness flows. Love is broken, hearts are broken, and the souls are broken. And what is this all for? It is for the standing legacy that will come. And for me, David's legacy is still to come in our next generation of emergency managers. Kei te miha tū ki a koutou. Mā waira e tauri mā te mara iwa ora a mā te tika mā te pono me te aro hae.
Kia ora, Tanya. Thank you for those lovely words in Waiata. Our next speaker will be Joe Horrocks. Joe is the Chief Resilience and Research Officer at the Natural Hazard Commission, NHC Tokatuake. Joe.
Hi, everyone. David and I had some things in common that we bonded over the years. Nerded out over might be a better description. Foremost amongst them was a love of volcanoes, way before it ever became an academic pursuit for either of us. We were both inspired, if inspired is the right word, by the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. For me, at the age of very, very young, I have always felt like it was a life-defining event. I think David felt the same, but he also had an extra reason for his interest. The USGS volcanologist that was famously killed in that event was his namesake, David A. Johnston. I think that gave him a little extra affinity with the event, a little fact that stayed with him, maybe spurred him on harder, like maybe he was doing enough work for two David Johnstons. There was a second volcano that featured prominently for both of us, Ruapehu. For me, I came to New Zealand in February 1996, specifically to study volcanoes or volcanic ash. And when Ruapehu erupted a few months later in June, it was seriously the best day of my life. Don't tell my son. Similarly, we've heard how David was 2 years into his PhD on community perceptions of volcanic hazards at Ruapehu when it erupted in September 95. I think he was a combination of awe-inspired, academically excited, and grateful, and it made his PhD and perhaps sent him on the trajectory that it did. The upshot for both of us was a lifelong respect and love for both mountains, especially Ruapehu in our backyard. And over the last nearly 30 years, we frequently talked about and hatched plans for how to honour that. Of course, this year is the 30th anniversary of the 95 eruption of Ruapehu. David had started making some plans for some kind of celebratory event, and I very much hope we can continue that and do something in his name. So I had mostly been here to talk about David's professional legacy to the practice of disaster risk reduction, but volcanoes. So as we've heard, David was not just prominent in the field of disaster research, he was a leader and, to my mind, a trailblazer at the forefront of that melding of physical hazard science and social science. There might have been others, but to me, he was the first one who really epitomised that and a key figure for me to follow. Though David's PhD was already a combination of physical and social science, I think that eruption and the effects and impacts it had on communities cemented in his mind, and then subsequently, the rest of us, of understanding hazards and risk in the context of communities, in the context of people, their perceptions and psychology and drivers. Importantly, David always promoted a strengths-based capacities approach that focused on education and participation, of building communities' understanding and capabilities and capacities as the very core of overall disaster resilience. And that's quite different from earlier approaches, that were quite paternalistic and focused on protection, more of a military style approach. As one of many in the audience today, kind of now responsible for promoting disaster resilience, that has made such a difference. To understand what builds disaster resilience, how to connect with people in this context, how to enable and empower action. It matters to me in my job, it matters to my organisation, and it matters to the country. So I haven't been an academic for a very long time, but I'm pretty sure most researchers still just want to create understanding, to make a difference and to have impact, whether in policy, planning, practice, or in community or social outcomes. Well, David did enough of that, not just for 2 David Johnstons, but for several lifetimes. And I can only thank him for me, on behalf of all of us, for that. Thank you.
Kia ora, Joe. Thank you. Our next speaker is Julia Becker. Julia is an Associate Professor with Joint Centre for Disaster Research, one of David's most long-standing colleagues and friends.
Kia ora koutou. First of all, I just want to thank you all for your lovely messages that you've sent through to the JCDR and to Carol and Josh as well. They've really been amazing. You've shared some lovely stories, and we've read every one of them and appreciated every single one of them. So thank you. And if anybody wants to share any more, please continue to send them. So I've known David for 27 years. I first met David on the volcano short course back in 1998. And I first worked with him at GNS Science, and then I moved on to Massey University to work with him as well. There's lots of things I could say about David, but I want to focus on 2 key areas really. So David's contribution to research and this idea of his contribution to capacity development that Joe was just speaking about. So education. So from a research perspective, lots of people have mentioned today that he's quite a humble person, and so he didn't always talk about the amazing researcher he was. He's a world-leading researcher on disasters and emergency management, and has had many leadership roles in the research space within Aotearoa and internationally. So he's been involved with the Natural Hazards Platform or Resilience to Nature's Challenge as a leader. He was Deputy Director of Quake Corps, and he's been on many Endeavour bids as well. So great involvement in leadership in terms of research. He wrote over 260 papers, and he's had nearly 10,000 citations, so that's nearly 10,000 people using and reading his work. Sorry, David, you probably don't want me to to talk you up, but this is the last time, not the last time, but one of the only times we get to talk you up here. As researchers, we have different numbers that we use to assess how good a researcher is, and one of these is the H-index, which is essentially you look at how many papers someone's produced, and then you look at how many people have cited them. David and I regularly used to search up our H-indexes to see how awesome we were. We didn't actually share that particular activity with anyone else. But his was 51, which was amazing, a really great H-index. He first authored a lot of key papers which are well cited. Some of these are to do with volcanic hazard risk perceptions that have been talked about, measuring tsunami preparedness in coastal Washington, reflective of a nearly 25-year working relationship with the emergency managers in Washington State, and a really key paper, I thought, on the 2010 to 11 Canterbury earthquakes, where he looked at earthquake injuries and causes and contexts. One of the amazing things I'd like to sort of point out is that 99% of his papers had co-authors. So everything he published, he brought his partners in, he brought his co-authors in, and they were involved in the research and in writing up the research, which really just reflects how collaborative he was. Another interesting stat I'd like to point out is that 45% of those papers, he was the last author. Now, there's a reason for this. We used to joke about it. We'd say that you really made it when you were the last author, because there were lots of other great people out there doing all this research and writing up this research, but you were still a really important person to be involved in the process. And even if you were really busy, they valued your contribution to that research and that paper. So you've really made it if you've become last author on papers. He liked to talk about research needing to inform practice, which is what Joe was just talking about before, and he often used the words useful, usable, and used. So taking those little tidbits of information that you found in the research and then bringing them into policy, into planning, where you're really making an impact to create a safer society. The second part I wanted to talk about was education. So again, as Joe pointed out just before, which is a great segue, he had a genuine interest in education and capacity building. And I think others can correct me perhaps if I'm wrong. It started with perhaps the Volcano Short Course, which was started back in 1997, which was the year before I took it, where he'd been involved in responding to the 95 and 96 Ruapehu eruptions. And he'd seen that there was a lack of knowledge out in the sector on what volcanoes were and how you needed to respond to them. So this course incorporated bits of science, bits of social science, and bits of response planning. And this course still runs to this day. It's still really popular. That there was one last year. He ran lots of other conferences, workshops, short courses, and of course he visited schools, as Tanya was just talking about before. And when he came to Massey, he started the Emergency Management Institute, which again is a week-long course where people can kind of come for an Emergency Management 101. They can find out about emergency management and again use the research that was being done to feed into the course so that people could kind of understand what the problems and issues were, combined with some of the practical issues that were happening out in the sector, and people could discuss and reflect on what was working and what wasn't, and how to make improvements. David really loved face-to-face teaching. He was always there at a short course. He was always there when I was running block courses, but he wasn't so hot on some of the technology aspects. It's like, I honestly don't know how often he went into Stream, which is our online learning student learning portal. And I'm not quite sure he knew how to navigate the student management system that well. He used to call on some of us to come in and kind of help him with some of those things. But that was fine. He did love the face-to-face teaching. He was really passionate about the capacity development of early career researchers, Māori and Pacifica, bringing those students in to take some of our courses and to undertake research projects. And he worked a lot with schools in Tairāwhiti on the East Coast, and places like Ross Common School in South Auckland, where he was really excited when the students were able to put together like some videos about drop, covering and hold. He used to love showing us that video. As Vicky pointed out, I don't know where Vicky is, she's down there somewhere, also loves research students projects and supervised over 35 PhDs and 16 master's projects to completion. So I'm just going to finish up and close now. But some people did ask me why I spent so long working with David. Why did I spend 27 years working with him? And that's because I believed he was genuinely a really good person who wanted to do good. And because I believed in the mission. I don't know how many people have heard of the mission. Yeah, a few people have heard of the mission. So he used to talk about the mission, which is really about us keeping communities safe from disasters. And so we did this through our research and through our improving practice. But if there's one message I think he would want me to reiterate, is that we need to continue the mission. So I'm going to put out a call for us to join together and play our part in the mission. Whether you're a researcher, whether you're a practitioner, whether you're a community member living in your community. It's really only by working together that we can continue to make progress towards achieving the goal of a safer society. So thank you, David. We'll miss you, but together we will continue your mission.
Thanks, Julia. Our final speaker is Cynthia White. Cynthia is Pro-Vice Chancellor of College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Massey University.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Yes, I'm Cynthia White. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor here in Te Kura Pukenga Tangata, in which JCDR is one of the research centres as part of the School of Psychology headed by Professor Kirsty Ross. The honour falls to me to provide the concluding tribute to David, and given the hour, I will be brief. This afternoon has been an occasion for us to reflect on and celebrate David's contribution as a scholar, a leader, a mentor, a colleague and a friend. Of course, such has been the scale and significance of that contribution that we have only distilled a fraction of the person and a fraction of his life's work. The sudden loss of David has been a poignant reminder of the value of a life, value which paradoxically we only now fully realise in its absence. I want to thank all of those who made today possible, including Tangata Whenua, JCDR, and all of you who've journeyed here to honour not only David's accomplishments, but the dedication, curiosity, commitment and passion that drove him. In the 2 decades, and I want to speak about that briefly, in the 2 decades since David established the Joint Centre for Disaster Research, universities and research centres here in Aotearoa and internationally have undergone a sea change in the scope and depth of their mission to serve a wide range of communities and to demonstrate the public value and relevance of what they do. In this, David was the consummate academic citizen. We see David in the call to develop and communicate impactful research. That was David. In the call to form and maintain partnerships with iwi, government and industry. that was David. In conducting world-leading impactful research, that was David. In the commitment to Te Reti o Waitangi, that was David. In the increasing focus on transdisciplinary research, that was David. In opening opportunities for others, that was David. In taking research into communities, that was David. In fostering and maintaining networks, that was David. In responding to the challenges of our age, that was David. And so, colleagues, friends, it is with this image and example that we can go forward and continue to honour all that David has made possible in Aotearoa and beyond. We can take enormous inspiration from the energy, drive, enterprise and commitment of David, and each person here today in the Great Hall can give testament to those qualities and countless points of contact and connection. So in closing, I want to refer to one example that is very close in time and place to here. And it was late last winter when I had the honour and the pleasure to attend the afternoon seminar that David hosted on the transit of Venus. Many of you were there, on citizen science and the Chatham Islands. After the seminar, David invited those gathered to come here to the Great Hall, to the Mount Cook trig station, once the 0 point of the New Zealand Land Survey System. It's the position marked on the floor of the foyer of this Great Hall, just beyond the doors when you go out. Look for a brass plaque on the floor. That was the 0 point for the trig station. I don't want to create a traffic jam. It will be there for some time. In this, David was, as ever, honouring heritage, sharing knowledge, and opening up the significance of place and of science. So, as you pass, please take a moment to acknowledge David, the scholar, practitioner, and science communicator, and all that David, the person, has pointed us to. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
So we've come to the conclusion. I have a few remarks and then we'll wrap up with a karakia. David has organised more conferences than anyone I've ever met, and he would give me at best a B for timekeeping. The A goes to Simon, my fellow gender balance brother. And thanks to the many people at Massey who, especially the Joint Centre for Disaster Research, who have brought this together, we've had them working in shifts. What a touching service. Heartfelt, thought-provoking. I've learned a lot more about David, our generous friend, today. As Callum said at the funeral, David's legacy is not something that will be ending with him, clearly. We will step into his shoes. He's had such an impact, it will survive him long into the future, and that's on all of us to carry forward. Leanne made a really important point. David was true to his values, and he had a global reach. We'll miss his mentoring of staff, graduates, and as a friend. He's always happy, driven, passionate, inspiring all of us. His commitment to public good and to working as a team and connecting widely will live on with all of us. And his visionary drive for societal resilience and lovely positive presence will be deeply missed by many. He was a wonderful man. David will miss you dearly. The dude abides.
Ko tai mai tātou ki te pito whakamutunga o tō tātou hui mate ai tēnei ahi, te mihi tuatahi ki a koutou kei ngā kai kōrero, ara ko ngā kākā wahanui me ki i tukua ngā kupu maha ki te āta tui te korowai o te whakaaro he tohu maimaharatanga ki a Rāwiri. Mihi ki a koe Graham, nāu i arataki i a tātou katoa e rungi te kaupapa. Nō reira, ki a koutou katoa e koe e koroma Tēnei te mihi ki o koutou a hara mai nei ki te whai wāhi, tēnā tātou ko te tumanako ia kei a haumaru, te hoki ki te kāinga, tēnā tātou katoa me karikia. Unuhia ko te paumua, ko te pauroto, ko te pau whakauruhanga atu ki te tonga. Te manu hairangi, te tāwi karo, kōkiri ki te mate, hoki ki te ora. Ki mihi ia whanno, hara mai te toki. Haumi e hui e tai. Refreshments just outside, I understand.